The legal issue is straightforward. The son of a U.S. citizen born abroad is a natural-born citizen.
But it's never been tested. You know full well because you've done it on other issues.
Listen, the Constitution and laws of the United States are straightforward.
Donald Trump is saying that you had a Canadian passport.
It's not true.
False.
Yeah.
Never had a Canadian passport in your entire life.
Of course not. No.
And you're sure you asked your mother, you asked your dad, you never had one.
Yes, I'm sure. At the end of the day, this is a non-issue.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now is Dr. Victoria Coates. She is National Security Advisor to Senator Ted Cruz and also happens to be the author of David Sling, The History of Democracy in 10 Works of Art, a great new book. And welcome. Good to see you.
Steve,
Thanks for coming in.
It's wonderful to be here.
We will get to the book, I promise.
Great.
So what do you make of this whole issue that's been raised? Is he qualified to be the President of the United States?
He is eminently qualified to be President of the United States. His mother, Eleanor, is from Delaware and has always been an American citizen, as has he. And this is no different. I was pregnant with both my kids working abroad in Florence and in Amsterdam. And if I had happened to have them while I was abroad, they would still be eligible to be president because I'm an American citizen. So is Eleanor. I think that's case closed.
Case closed. All right. So Donald Trump brought this up to because of where he is in the Iowa polls, you think?
I think that maybe it's a backhanded compliment.
How so? What do you mean?
That if our numbers got good enough, it was going to be brought up in an attempt to trip the senator up with an issue that isn't really an issue.
Yet he's hard to trip up.
He is.
Being the debater that he is and the intellect that he is. So, but people write that this hasn't been tested in the courts and that a Democratic candidate, if he were the nominee, could take it to court and make an issue of it?
I'm not a lawyer, so that I don't know. If that were to happen, I think it would be very quickly and cleanly resolved in Senator Cruz's favor. So, I mean, I can't dictate the actions of others in that case.
His foreign policy, you've written about foreign policy as it applies to Ted Cruz, and you talk about kind of a false choice between Hillary or another Bush term. Let's focus on, we know how he would differ from Hillary. How would his foreign policy differ from the second Bush term, for instance?
Well, I really would prefer to define this in terms of what Senator Cruz stands for rather than criticize somebody else's. But I do think there was, particularly in the second Bush term, a very heavy emphasis placed on democracy promotion as an absolute, that the universal application of democracy would be a universal good for the United States. And I think as we look at history, certainly look at President Reagan's example, that may not be entirely accurate. And Senator Cruz, particularly with the lessons, not so much of the second Bush term, but very much of the two Obama terms, has seen some very negative effects to intervention and attempts to impose democracy.
In Egypt, in the Arab world, in Libya, everywhere
Particularly
else.
Libya, the way the transition in Egypt was managed, and now the calls to establish a democracy in Syria. It's not that he doesn't want Syria to be a democracy, but rather he sees it as an extremely challenging and policy with a lot of pitfalls that have not been thought through.
So his foreign policy philosophy would be described as more Reagan-esque than Bush-like?
I think that's very accurate.
Okay, good. All right, now the book, talking about democracy.
Indeed.
And you've done a tremendous work here for anybody who has any interest in art, and even if you don't, it's amazing. And you talk about the 10 works of art and how they relate to the free world and the Western world.
Yes, it's a little hard to criticize Senator Cruz as being hostile to democracy when his foreign policy advisor just published a history of democracy. Still, they do it, but it's hard. And what's great about David Sling is the 10 works of art that are collected here are things people generally know. Michelangelo's David, Monet's Water Lilies, these are cherished works of art. But what people don't generally know is that they were all self-consciously created to commemorate a free system. And when you start thinking about them in that context, they provide a really unique insight into that history.
How so? Pick one of them and talk about how it was specifically created in the manner you would.
Michelangelo's David is a great choice because it's one of the most famous objects on the planet. But what people don't know about it is that Michelangelo was a very politically active, engaged artist, and particularly with the Florentine Republic. And he had grave concerns about the Medici family, who were amassing a disproportionate amount of power and eventually would go on to become the Dukes of Florence. And when the Medici were exiled for a period, he went back to Florence to carve this statue. He knew the great block of marble, and he knew he wanted to go back to the book of Samuel and carve the shepherd David waiting for the giant. And he was giving the Florentine people a message to also be prepared.
Is there any modern day, artist that fits into your category in 30 seconds?
Well, we come up to Picasso, so we get well into the 20th century, and maybe there'll be volume 2.
Yeah, I was going to say today, we tend to think of artists as these liberals struggling, living in a loft somewhere in the Greenwich Village. But hey, great seeing
Fantastic.
you. Nice
Thank
meeting
you,
you.
Steve.
Get the book, ladies and gentlemen, David Sling, and we're coming back, folks, with Gimme 5. I promise you. You will not want to miss this one. Don't go away.